And so if you do have to stop to go and answer the doorbell or to do some homeschooling, you can always pick it back up from that recording later, and we'll have that posted up for about a month usually via our various channels. James knows the wizardry of how to do that. So he'll be hopefully doing that for us later on. It's, as ever, an open and discursive session, so please don't hold back on your questions. We'll try and take as many of them as you can, and I'm sure our colleagues on will hopefully follow up any that we aren't able to get to today in the time that we've got. So I think without any further ado, we're up to nearly all the people on I think that we were expecting. Let me just introduce then our three panellists for today. First up, we've got Peter Wally, and Peter is a Strategic Rail Officer at Transport for Greater Manchester, who operate and look after public transport in the Greater Manchester area, as I'm sure most of you know. Peter, I'm sure, will tell us a bit more about his role and his remit in that organisation and when we get into his slides, but of particular importance to us is the work that Peter and colleagues have been doing on the strategic study of rail freight in and around the Northwest area and Manchester in particular, and I think that that's a really interesting and important piece of work. So we're all looking forward to hearing a little bit more about that. Following that, Phil Smart from Rail Future, who is a stranger to many of us, is going to talk about the work that Rail Future have been developing and looking at alternative routings into Trafford Park and across the Castlefield corridor, a piece of work which I know some of you have seen, and I know some of you have got thoughts and questions about to raise and see what that opportunity is. And finally, Ed Best. Ed is the Regional Development Manager for North for Suez. I think domestic waste has been one of the boom businesses in lockdown as we all went home and ordered everything off Amazon in big cardboard boxes. So Ed's going to be talking to us about their rail operations and opportunities for the future as well. So we're hoping for a really interesting session. Please do drop your questions in. And without further ado, what I shall do is hand over to our first speaker, Peter Walley from Transport for Greater Manchester, who'll take us through his presentation. Peter, thank you very much, and over to you.
Great, thanks, Maggie. Let me just wrestle with the technology. Can you let me know if you can see this? Does that come up?
It has, yes. Perfect.
Great, thanks, Maggie. Brilliant. So yeah, hello everyone. I'm Peter Walley. I work in the rail team at Transport for Greater Manchester. I'd like to thank RFG, first of all, for organising this event to discuss rail freight issues across Greater Manchester and the wider Northwest. I didn't tell Maggie this was actually my birthday today, so extra thanks for putting it on to mark my big occasion and giving me the opportunity to speak. Thanks, Maggie. So I'll aim to talk for about 10 minutes, covering three broad areas. First, I'll give a very quick background to TFGM, who we are, and outline our vision for the future. As Maggie touched on, I'll also be presenting the findings of a recent freight routing study, which was undertaken on our behalf, looking at current and future freight across our city region. And then lastly, I'd like to use this opportunity to demonstrate how TFGM seeks to support a growth in rail freight in the future, and also give a bit of a call out to industry partners in helping us achieve this. So moving forward. So Transport for Greater Manchester, as I'm sure most of you are aware, is the transport body, an arm of the combined authority responsible for delivering Greater Manchester's transport strategy and its commitments across its 10 districts. As a local government body, our policy and direct set by the Greater Manchester Mayor, which is currently Andy Burnham, and also the elected members of the Greater Manchester Combined Authority. It would be remiss of me not to emphasise Greater Manchester's significance in terms of being an economic centre for the North. I'm certainly not an economist, but the statistic that would always get batted around the now virtual corridors of TFGM was that the economic output of the city region is greater than that of Wales, Northern Ireland, or the North East. So although the pandemic may dent growth predictions, particularly in the short term, the mantra of building back better is certainly something the city region is working towards, and we still expect to see significant levels of growth both in terms of population and economic activity in the next 20 years. And it's very much this background of growth in which our transport vision is set, and TFGM is responsible for delivering this transport vision. So the 4 pillars of it are supporting sustainable economic growth, protecting our environment, improving quality of life for all, and developing an innovative city region. And just to focus a bit more on that environmental commitment, Greater Manchester's Environment Plan sets out a pathway to be carbon neutral by 2038. And that's a commitment that's shared across all aspects of the economy. Although it's clear that transport will have to bear a fair amount of that burden. And we intend to do this not only by incentivizing low emission vehicles and new technologies, we also really want to see a modal shift in both passenger and freight. So this means supporting growth in rail freight alongside other low emission freight solutions. And that leads me quite nicely onto the study which we commissioned to do on our behalf back in 2019. The study was very much centred around exploring the issues of rail freight in Greater Manchester in order to give us a really good basis of understanding, but also an appreciation of where rail freight demand might take us in the future. And I just want to emphasise that what I'm presenting today will not form any definitive policy positions or feed into infrastructure decision making. It's really something that we're using as an evidence base. So the study had 3 main parts. The first was we asked MBST and Jacobs to provide us with maps and graphs and data on all the freight movements within Greater Manchester. So that's freight to and from terminals, but also through the Greater Manchester conurbation. We also asked them to talk to industry partners, which some people on this webinar might have been asked to do. So that included port groups, terminals, and freight operators, and also Network Rail. So we could really understand where the aspirations for the industry is taking us. The next stage was a bit more of using the data to develop a series of future freight demand forecasts for us across 3 different scenarios, which I'll touch on a bit later. And then the final stage is we asked the consultants to use those 3 growth forecasts and map it onto the existing passenger corridors, giving reasonable assumptions as to where the freight flows would be routed. And then finally, we asked them to present us with some very high level ideas about potential options for infrastructure investment, which could help accommodate this growth. So in terms of understanding the picture today, sorry if this is a bit basic for people on the call, but Greater Manchester is served by 10 rail connected terminals. And as you can see, the majority of freight trains operating into the Greater Manchester terminals are intermodal services, making use of the 2 container terminals at Trafford Park. Alongside this, we have construction materials moving to Greater Manchester's centrally located terminals, and biomass waste, recycled materials, mostly from the energy from waste sector. In this table, we haven't included through traffic, but that includes significant levels of intermodal flows on the West Coast Main Line, construction traffic through Stockport and Trafford, and biomass flows from Liverpool to Drax Power Station. So moving on, we're going to hear from Phil later. I'm sure he's going to talk about this in much more detail. But terminal location is a key challenge of freight routings within Greater Manchester. There's no hiding from that. And as you can see from the map, many of the terminals are located in and around central Manchester, which means they are competing for that limited capacity with passenger services. Our evidence does suggest that terminals are located broadly in the right places for the markets they serve today. So, for example, those aggregate terminals located in the city centre do seem to be best placed to serve the construction activity which is taking place there. And also some analysis we did a couple of years ago, it demonstrated that boxes from Trafford Park were staying within Greater Manchester, although I entirely appreciate there's a bit of a chicken and egg dilemma with that one. But as I said, terminal locations are problematic and they do dictate routings in Greater Manchester. And no more evidently is this shown than through the Castlefield corridor, as that's the only access into Trafford Park. But we also have other constraints on our network. This includes the steep gradient from Manchester Victoria to Miles Platting, which limits the ability of freight trains to travel eastwards when fully loaded. These just are two very high level graphs that I pulled together. The first shows the amount of road freight which is moved into Greater Manchester, and also that next to the amount of rail freight and air freight, which you can't even see because it didn't show up at a level of 0.1, I think, million tons per year. And then the bottom right pie chart is just a further breakdown of that rail freight by million tons per year. And I think certainly the bar chart is quite stark in terms of the road to rail proportion, but really we should be seeing this as a big opportunity for rail freight as we move towards a world of decarbonisation. As I mentioned earlier, the second stage of the study, we asked NBST and Jacob to look at 3 different future growth demand forecasts. The first one was a baseline using Network Rail's freight growth forecast, which I'm sure most in the industry will be aware of and familiar with. The second growth forecast we looked at was using the Network Rail forecast, but including aspirations of industry stakeholders that we heard during our stakeholder engagement exercise, particularly increasing the flows over the Transpennine route and further east-west flows. And then finally, we did a bit of blue sky thinking, and we thought about, well, what would happen if there's a significant shift, probably a government initiative, to move long distance freight by rail rather than road. So we asked MBST and Jacobs to explore what would happen if all long distance freight flows arrived into Manchester and then were transferred to an electric road freight vehicle at a terminal located close to the M60. And importantly, with all these scenarios, we assumed an unconstrained network and terminal capacity. So I appreciate that this is a lot of numbers. I'll try and talk you through it. So the final stage of the study looked at how the different scenarios mapped onto the existing passenger network. And if we just look at Network Rail's growth scenario for freight, we can see a near doubling freight services through the Chesterfield corridor and on the Crewe line, predominantly caused by an increase in intermodal activity at Trafford Park. And we also see a significant increase in traffic on the west coast, caused by growth in Anglo-Scottish intermodal flows. So even in the sort of the most conservative of growth scenarios, we see significant pressures on the network. And then if I take you forward to scenario 2, which was incorporating some of the industry's aspirations for future growth, this is where we saw particular growth on Chatham Moss and through Diggle, caused by an increase in east-west flows, which was certainly an ambition that was echoed by porter and freight operators. And then finally, the big bang scenario in scenario 3, again, we see a big increase on the west coast, but also through Mid-Cheshire and Earlstown, Ordsall Lane. So this is due to the sort of significant level of the was testing, but also we asked MBST and Jacobs to come up with some locations of terminals for sites on the M60. And that's why you get the increase in growth, particularly on the Mid-Cheshire. Right. So where does that leave me? So there's a clear opportunity for growth for growth in rail freight in the future. But what's constraining it now will continue to constrain it in the future if we don't see the investment. We also need to make sure that the right investment decisions are made to be able to accommodate this growth. We feel that the needs of freight, as I'm sure many on this call do, aren't being properly valued when it comes to planning for future capacity. And simply put, there are no easy, quick or cheap fixes to many of this. It requires significant effort across the industry and lots of joined up thinking. But as I mentioned quite a few times, the decarbonisation agenda must be seen as an opportunity, but rail freight needs to show its colours here and play its part to decarbonise in order to maintain its advantage over road. And we feel that a real long-term commitment to electrification will certainly go some way in achieving this. And finally, I'd like to say how TFGM can help. So, as I've already mentioned, we have our own multimodal freight agenda. We have targets for clean air, carbon, and vehicle use within our strategy documents. But due to the very nature of how the freight market operates, we don't have the same levers as we do with passenger services. But what you can expect us to do is we can ensure that our policies and strategies at TFGM are aligned to support rail freight, and that includes accommodating both passenger and freight services in the future. We will continue to work with our council partners to develop land use policies that support sustainable freight and rail connected terminals wherever that's possible. And also we'll continue to make the case for the right investment solutions to support rail freight needs. And I couldn't be on this call without having an ask for others. So where we really need help is to provide the evidence to allow us to make the case and help ensure the opportunities for growth are unlocked. The study has been great for us in providing us with that shopping list and understanding of the problem and the picture out there. But what we're really looking for is a more collaborative approach and providing us with the right evidence to enact on some of these ideas. So I ask for you to see TFGM as a useful ally. Get in touch if you think that we can support you in any way. We've got contact details there, and I look forward to the discussion at the end. I hope that was useful.
Thank you very much, Peter. That was excellent and a really good opening. And as I say, if you want to pop questions in the Q&A for Peter, and we will definitely be picking them up as we get through into the session towards the end. So thank you very much. Let's move on through the presentations, and then we'll come back to questions. I can see they're coming in now, which is brilliant. Okay, our second speaker, I need more coffee, is Phil Smart from Rail Future. Phil and colleagues have been looking at some of the dilemmas that Peter's already mentioned around freight routing through Manchester, and come up with some alternative proposals that they want to share today around how that routing could develop in future. So Phil, many thanks, and over to you.
Okay, thanks for inviting me to your webinar. Apologies for the rather London-centric background to those northern viewers. I'll begin just by introducing a bit more about myself. As Maggie said, I'm a member of Rail Future, but I've also served as a local councillor in Ipswich since 1983, so I understand the planning side of things. This, of course, makes me a meddling politician, but at least I'm not a meddling civil servant. I'm a keen advocate of the railway, and I have over the years used my local government role to advance its cause in various ways, which include, for example, persuading my authority to become one of the founder members of the East West Rail Consortium in the 1990s. But in the year 2000, I drew up the plans for the Ipswich Freight Cord, got its route protected in the local plan. It took us about another 8 years to convince Network Rail it was deliverable, but the project was opened in 2014. And it's a project that came about because Ipswich is just 12 miles away from what is, by volume, the north of England's most significant container port, that of Felixstowe. And my involvement in that time developed my interest in freight and has led me to apply my mind to bottlenecks elsewhere in the system, such as at Ely and Hawley, and now, of course, Castlefield. If the recent pandemic has taught us anything, it is probably that now is the ideal time for freight to get on the front foot and argue the case about how we want to see the network develop in a zero carbon future, and get some ideas out there. So I'll have a go at sharing the old screen. Slideshow, and there, I think. Great. Okay, you can all see that. In January of last year, Transport for the North had considered the problem of the Castlefield corridor in a paper which, among other things, called for an immediate rationalisation of the timetable to restore performance in the short term, and which is currently the subject of a consultation by Network Rail, renewed lobbying for the full implementation of of a package of measures known as Package C, involving more track and additional platforms at Piccadilly, which was quite an expensive package. And thirdly, an assessment for the options of freight, and this is the focus of our attention today. Now, freight, as we all know, is an essential but not universally popular user of the network. It cannot skip stops en route to make up time if it runs late. It can't turn back short of its destination and ask its payload to catch the next available service. Neither can it work from home. It doesn't complain on social media when it's held up on its journey, and therefore is quite a popular target for politicians. Now, I want to make it clear I've got the greatest respect for Andy Burnham. He and I, after all, are in the same political tribe. But such too is my respect for the Director General of the Rail Freight Group that I knew this was an argument Andy wasn't going to win. So my desire to find a solution that they could both sign up to provided further incentive to apply my thoughts to the Castlefield problem. Trafford Park mostly handles maritime containers. So to understand the role of rail in the intermodal market, it is first necessary to understand what is happening at sea. Some of you may be familiar with this map of the world. It's been redrawn to show the distribution of container ports and is a rough approximation of the centre of gravity of global containerised trade. The first thing you will appreciate is that if you want a successful economy, you need good links with the guys over on the right-hand side of the map. And the second thing you'll notice is that in this global context, at least, we are all northerners. The second map shows the route taken by these giant vessels that carry up to 24,000 20-foot equivalent units. And they're so large that they've reduced the North Sea to the status of a mere milk round, dropping off the full containers and picking up the empties. So on the port or left side are the UK ports of Southampton, London Gateway and Felixstowe. And to starboard, we've got Le Havre, Zeebrugge, Antwerp, Rotterdam, Bremerhaven, Hamburg and Gothenburg. Deviation from this straight and narrow route costs time and money, so the northern economy relies on good links to the southern ports. Felixstowe handles over 40% of the UK's deep sea container market, of which 70% is bound for the Midlands and the North. I spend quite a lot of time locally lecturing about the need for electrification of the Felixstowe to Nuneaton rail line and to remove the bottlenecks at Ely and Hawley junctions. To benefit the northern economy, it's sometimes necessary to build in the south. In the passenger market, HS2 benefits the northern cities, yet requires money to be spent at Euston, Old Oak Common and other sites in the south. Freight is of equal economic importance. If F2N stood for something like Far East and Northern Powerhouse instead of Felixstowe to Nuneaton, then perhaps its purpose and urgency would attract more attention. But that's at the East Anglian end of the pipe, and today we're dealing with constraints in Manchester. For every container that arrives in Manchester by rail, there's another that needlessly, in our view, goes by road. To meet the demands of the zero carbon economy, as well as accommodating for future growth, we therefore need rail capacity, which is more than double that of today. In 2019, Network Rail suggested that this could be achieved by running more freight trains at night. But freight takes many hours to travel between south and north, and no matter what time it arrives or departs in or from Manchester, it will end up in someone's morning or evening peak along the way. And it's this that informs our thinking. You'll notice the final bit on the slide. Some say that thinking outside the box, but within the budget envelope, is no way to get a job at Network Rail, but perish the thought that any such cynics are watching this. Now, we all know that Trafford Park is in an awkward place, but I'll put this slide up to remind us that it currently has no alternative but to approach from the east via Castlefield, where it takes up valuable signalling capacity. This is a problem that will only get worse when we try to run longer trains, which will simultaneously occupy platforms and junctions at several locations as they pass through. It is also operationally constrained. Trains have to be split in half to fit within its loading sidings, wasting both time and resources. How much better would it be to have one 800-metre terminal at Trafford Park rather than two small ones? The Northwest, as we know, is short of freight terminals, and at some stage we're going to need additional capacity to serve the Greater Manchester area. So we looked around for sites that could be rail connected. But what makes a good terminal? Well, we have to have easy access to and from the main rail network, and good access by road too for onward transit, and capable of taking longer trains. preferably with direct access rather than via reception roads, which again will save shunting time, but also capable of future expansion. So we looked around and we found a site that in our view ticked all the boxes, and that's at Carrington, which is conveniently located near the main road system and with enough room to accommodate longer trains. If we take a closer look, we see that it reuses an old rail formation into the former chemical works that was accessed from the former Cheshire Lines route between Glazebrook and Skelton Junctions. This brownfield land is zoned for employment use in the Trafford local plan currently out for consultation. The north of the site is only about a kilometre away from the railway in East Flixton, where a through connection could be established to provide a western link to Trafford Park via the site of any new terminal at Carrington, thus serving both the existing and new terminals at the same route. There are a couple of options for establishing this connection, and this is the first. The gradient going north is about 1 in 280. And going south from Trafford Park, there's a short section west of Flixton of an adverse gradient of 1 in 135, but only for about 500 metres, less than a train length. But anyway, if that is still a concern, we've got option 2. If you're prepared a little bit more, there is an option that gives us a gradient of only 1 in 3000. By turning the Restore Your Railway badge into an extreme sport, it involves knocking a tunnel through the embankment to access the surviving formation of the original rail alignment, which was abandoned when the Manchester Ship Canal was built in 1893. That was about 20 years before Richard Beeching was born. The second challenge was how to connect this route to the West Coast Main Line. And recalling our desire to avoid upsetting the locals with any property demolition, finding a south-facing junction wasn't easy. History has not been kind to us at Skelton Junction, where routes to the south once existed from every direction, except, of course, the one we wanted. Further east, we looked at connecting to the Style Line, which is the current route for freight traffic, but either development or construction of a motorway stood in the way. The right fork at North Endon Junction takes us back north through Stockport, but the left fork is a freight-only link towards the Hope Valley Line. Just after this passes beneath the West Coast Main Line at Adswood, we found some white space on the map. And fortuitously, it wasn't a golf course, else all rational argument would have been lost. Better still, it turns out to be a former landfill site, last used over 25 years ago, but as yet undeveloped. So we were in. This provides sufficient room for a junction using 250-metre radius curves to link up with the West Coast Main Line, which bifurcates at Cheadle Hulme. To Crewe via Wilmslow, carrying just 4 trains an hour, and to Stoke carrying 5, though some of these may eventually transfer to HS2, offering even greater capacity in future. This is the junction in more detail, showing the possibilities it offers, including that of an east-facing junction at Adswood, where a more convenient route to the Peak Forest quarries might be possible. So what we end up with is a strategic addition to the freight capacity around Manchester, the Stockport and Manchester avoiding line, if you like, offering plenty of access to the rest of the network. Well, that was the thinking outside the box bit, but to find out whether we had kept within the budget envelope, I approached Jonathan Moser of Rail Freight Solutions to sanity check our proposal. Such was his enthusiasm for this scheme that he donated about £20,000 worth of his time in undertaking a benefit cost analysis with a particular focus on the value of a western link to Trafford Park. He identified 2 distinct benefits. Firstly, by running trains straight under the gantries, unloading can commence while the train is being divided, saving shunting time. The greatest gain, however, comes with no longer being limited to the single train per hour offered by the existing route over Castlefield. These combined benefits achieved a doubling of capacity from 19 trains a day to 35. The overall benefit cost ratio worked out at around 4.5 to 1, and this uses Network Rail's 60-year appraisal evaluation they were applying to Package C. Network Rail are currently evaluating options around Manchester, and while Package C adds capacity between Deansgate and Piccadilly, it does little to address the congested infrastructure between there and Slade Lane Junction. As we see here, the advantage of the South Manchester link is that while 3 miles longer, it avoids the Castlefield bottleneck and therefore achieves competitive running time. So in summary, we provide new capacity for a variety of freight generators. Whoops, why is this going for? There we go. So it provides new capacity for a variety of freight generators, including the entirely new fit-for-purpose intermodal terminal. We free up capacity on the Castlefield corridor. We use mainly redundant formations with minimal use of non-railway land, just 3.5 kilometres. We get strategic access to the rest of the UK network, and there is growing interest in this scheme from industry stakeholders, not least one of the operators at Trafford Park. And finally, of course, it has a compelling benefit to cost ratio, although this includes the benefit, this does not include the benefits of Carrington or the Peak Forest or wider economic gains. The full report can be found on the Rail Future website by following links through to Castlefield Corridor. So thank you for your taking up the time today to listen to this proposal. So we will stop share.
There we go. Right, pressing all the right buttons, not necessarily in the right order there. I was. Great. Phil, thank you very much. That was fascinating. Folks who are listening in, please do pop your questions in the Q&A. We've got 1 or 2 coming in, but always time for a few more. I think what we will do is move swiftly on to Ed and listen to Ed's presentation, and then we'll do questions and discussions after that. So keep your questions coming. But in the meantime, Ed, over to you. Many thanks. Big green button. Perfect.
You will see that, yeah?
And now.
Okay, can you hear me?
You can.
Good stuff. Hi, everybody. My name's Ed Best. I'm the regional manager for Suez in the Northwest, primarily focused in Lancashire and Cumbria and Merseyside, and I spent a bit of time on our new contract with Greater Manchester last year. So I've got about a year's exposure to working with the rail network, so not too much, but I just wanted to give a bit of an overview about Suez and the rail network in the UK, challenges and opportunities. So to give you a bit of an overview of us in the UK, we've got a diverse range of activities and we are fully committed to shaping a sustainable environment now. Turnover of just over £800 million in 2019. It's probably quite maybe dropped a little bit last year because of everything that's been going on. We established in 1988. We're part of the global Suez Group and employ around 5,500 people. Brief overview of what we handle. We handle in the UK over 10 million tonnes per annum. Our goal is simple, it's to help give all waste materials a second life, ensuring they're reused, recycled or recovered for their energy content. We have about 23,500 industrial and commercial customers. We operate 11 municipal contracts, so they're contracts where we run the bin collections for the local councils. We hold 15 public-private partnership contracts, and we'll touch on some of those in the Northwest later in this presentation. And we operate across the UK 47 treatment contracts, so that ranges from handling residual waste or processing recyclables, etc. We have 11 energy from waste facilities. We've got 300 plus facilities in the network. And we, it says there how much megawatt hours we generate. So 326,000 from our landfill operations and over 1 million from our energy from waste facilities. This is our guiding principle, the circular economy. Not too sure how how much you guys know about the waste management part of the circular economy. But it quite clearly says here our aim is to prevent waste throughout the whole system. We target and harvest the materials front end, use logistics such as rail to move that material as efficiently as we can, to then treat and return that into the cycle of production and consumption. A bit of an overview on the Suez Group. We're on 5 continents around the globe, employing over 90,000 employees, with revenues over £18 billion per annum. And there in the detail, it explains how much energy renewable energy we produce, secondary raw materials we produce. We're a water and waste business, arguably slightly larger on the water side of things on a global basis, but in the UK, very firmly dominated by our waste and resources business. Suez and the rail network. In the UK, we transport over 1 million tonnes per annum. The local authorities that we support are stated there, so that's Merseyside Recycling and Waste Authority, the West London Waste Authority, and more recently the Greater Manchester Combined Authority. We have strategic partnerships with our friends at DB Schenker and Freightliner. The use of our rail infrastructure helps us from a sort of corporate and business strategy position, in the fact that it helps with our passion for the environment and our customer first values that we live towards. And the use of the rail infrastructure drives us forward to delivering our Shaping 2030 sustainability commitments on a corporate global stage, which is to reduce direct, indirect greenhouse gas emissions for our activities by 45%, help our customers avoid 20 million tonnes of CO2 emissions per annum, and offer 100% sustainable solutions for our customers worldwide. Quite big steps we're looking to take. Suez and the rail network in the northwest. Merseyside, as I touched on earlier, it's a 30-year contract, transporting 440,000 tonnes per annum from Knowsley, our rail transfer station, up to our energy from waste plant in Teesside called Wilton Energy from Waste Facility. Using this is through via DB Schenker. The rail offsets 127,000 tonnes of carbon emissions per annum. And as it says there, we firmly treat that waste, extracting the energy content, and that is used to power around about 63,000 homes in the northeast. Over in Manchester, it's a minimum term 7-year contract, which we commenced in the summer of 2019. We handle over 1 million tonnes on that contract in total, and roughly about 600,000 tonnes of that is residual waste. It offsets about 100,000 tonnes of CO2 emissions per annum, and the residual waste from the Greater Manchester area is thermally treated at the Runcorn Energy facility. Further, I was asked to talk a bit about the further support from the rail network, talking about challenges from an operational level, which is where my sort of exposure has been for the last 12 months. Additional paths is always welcome. I don't understand all the challenges that are around that, but discussing that with both DB Schenker and Freightliner some days would be wonderful, especially when there are issues, whether we've had a track possession out the blue or whatever earlier in the week, to catch up the lost movements, to get that flow going again and control our stock levels at both sides of our flow will be extremely useful. And also having advanced notification of track possessions. Sometimes they come out the blue and it really impacts us, and then we have to look to alternative ways to move the waste for our clients, the local authorities, and that can be sometimes extremely costly using road instead of rail at the drop of a hat. Opportunities. There's always, at the moment, there are some upcoming large public sector procurements focusing in the northwest. Lancashire County Council, we're keeping an eye out for them at the moment to see when they may come out to tender, and hopefully for a long-term procurement. Whether there's a link to the rail infrastructure there, we'll have to wait and see. But obviously always willing to talk to partners to see whether we could come up with solutions in advance. Suez have recently signed with Wheeler Brater a 500,000 tonnes per annum commitment that commences in the mid-2020s when 3 energy from waste facilities are developed by We Liberator. Again, there may be potential there to look to move some of that volume commitment via rail. And that is across the UK. I think there's a couple in the north and one down in Kelmsley. There is the new environment bill that's been put forward. We talk about it, EPR and DRS. We need to start thinking strategically now about how local authorities are going to be forced to not collect recyclables as a mix, but more as single streamed materials. Bottle banks and the like are going to become the norm. That material is going to have to be moved. Can it be moved efficiently? Could the rail infrastructure be used to do that? They're things that we're talking about now and looking to talk to partners to see what we can do. And finally, it's been touched on previous presentations today, decarbonisation. We're already talking with our partners on the rail about electrification and such like, and if we can look to do more of that as soon as possible, that's where Suez want to focus our efforts. I do have a video just to give you a bit of an overview of the Merseyside contract, but it's exactly the same for Manchester. But I'm not sure, Maggie, it's letting me play it, so I didn't know whether you'd be able to play that. It's only 3 minutes.
Ed, if you stop sharing your screen, let me see if I can pull your slides up.
Yeah.
2 ticks. Sorry, too many tabs open, that's my problem.
I can try, Maggie, or you?
I've got them here, Yvonne, I think, so.
Okay.
Let's see if it works. Sorry, I'm just having too many fingers not in the right order moment. Right, here we go. Let's try.
Thank you.
If this fails, what we will do is we'll send the link out to people if that's okay. Oh, is that working for you?
Yeah.
Cool.
Across the 690,000 households in Merseyside and Holton, residents can recycle through the curbside collections provided by each local council. They can take larger household items like furniture, electrical goods, textiles, metal and wood to household waste recycling centres across the region. In the past, residual waste, that's the waste that can't be or isn't currently being recycled, has been sent to landfill. But pioneering technology means it can now be used to generate electricity. Enough electricity, in fact, to power the equivalent of 63,000 homes. The journey to turn this waste into energy starts here at the Knowsley Rail Loading Transfer Station, where rubbish is tipped into 2 huge bunkers. Each one holds around 1,800 tonnes of waste. On average, the equivalent of 16,000 wheelie bins full of rubbish is delivered to the transfer station each day. A large grab crane moves the residual waste from the bunkers into the rail containers. The compacting machine compresses the waste so as much as possible fits into the container. The containers are then loaded onto the train while it's still inside the rail loading transfer station. Once the train is loaded, it begins the 8-hour journey to the energy from waste plant at Wilton on Teesside. Transporting the waste by rail saves the equivalent of 21,000 HGV journeys and offsets around 127,000 tonnes of CO2 emissions a year. 9 trains a week arrive at Wilton. Each container is hoisted from the train and lifted onto a hydraulic tilter, and the waste is tipped into a large bunker. A crane equipped with a huge grab claw picks the waste up and mixes it by dropping it into a second bunker. The mixed up waste is then dropped into a hopper that feeds the furnace, where it burns at temperatures of over 1,000 degrees. Even at these temperatures, it can take up to 4 hours to burn. Burning the waste generates flue gases, which pass through 2 boilers, converting it into superheated steam. The plant can supply heat as steam to the surrounding industrial businesses through a Wilton site network. Any steam that's not exported is fed into a turbine to generate electricity. A link to an on-site substation means that the electricity can be supplied to local businesses or fed directly into the national grid. The process is extremely efficient. The bottom ash produced is collected and cooled before being taken away on a large conveyor belt to a site facility. It's fed through a magnetic device to remove any metal, and then it's processed into secondary aggregates for use in the construction industry. A complex air quality control system is installed, which is so effective that it easily meets the stringent targets set by the Waste Incineration Directive. Stack emissions are continuously analysed and the results monitored by the Environment Agency. By using waste in this way, we can produce cost-effective energy and divert Merseyside and Holton's waste from landfill. Creating energy from waste not only reduces the need to put waste into landfill, but also means that your household rubbish can become a valuable resource.
Cool. Are we done, Ed?
Yes, thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much. Excellent. What I love about waste, whenever you see it, is it's the best combination of the most sophisticated technology and a grabber that just picks up rubbish, and everything in between. Oh, it's absolute genius. Right. Thank you all to our 3 speakers. That was brilliant. And Peter, I think, if your colleagues wanted to, share that video with people who don't understand what waste transfer is about internally as well, I'm sure we can do that. I've had a couple of comments about people who want copies of the slides, assuming that that's okay with you all. To send them out. People, if you want copy, the easiest way to do it is literally to just drop Yvonne an email or me an email. You've got our addresses, I'm sure, and we will send them out to you. That saves us sending them unnecessarily to people who don't want them. Just drop us an email and we will get them across to you. Right, let me take some of the questions that have come in, and thank you very much for those. Okay, so a question here for Peter. From Gary Blewett. Did the study consider incoming port terminal freight from either Holyhead or Liverpool? As linked to that is a rail freight terminal.
Yeah, it certainly did in the stakeholder engagement exercise. So so it did in the stakeholder engagement exercise, and then in the freight forecast as well. So yeah, it was included.
Brilliant. And another one for you, Peter. What priority does the current city region mayor attach to rail freight? It does seem the voice of passenger services drives freight.
Yeah, I saw this one, and yeah, certainly when he tweeted out about the Castleford corridor and removing freight services during the peak, did demonstrate a bit of a lack of understanding, but it's certainly something we're working on with him. He certainly has an understanding about how Manchester needs to grow in a sustainable way, and freight being a part of that. But the old passenger and freight conflict is a difficult one, and something that we're continually trying to manage.
Cool. Okay, so thank you, Peter. Some questions coming in for Phil. Let me pick them up. The one from Mike, who is Mike Hogg, who works for us in the north of England, our northern representative. Phil, any thoughts on access from the Diggle route for intermodal traffic to Carrington area, as the Hope Valley isn't likely to ever become an intermodal corridor? So that's
I spotted that, and thanks, Mike, for that question. We were looking at this, and you can bring, once you get to North Endon Junction, I think at least one of the waste trains uses the the sort of right turn at Heaton Norris Junction. So once you get to North Endon Junction and you turn counterintuitively turn right to go north, you go back up through Stockport and you can get over to through Denton and through Guide Bridge to get to the Diggle route that way. Currently, it's rather interesting that some of the peak forest traffic that wants to access the West Coast Main Line takes up a path in the opposite direction. And it comes up from Chinley and New Mills, and it goes all around the houses via Woodley and Hyde and comes down through Guide Bridge and Stockport. And it seems to take about half a day just to get out of Manchester. Whereas if it could turn left at Adswood, it would cut out that unnecessary, not only saving time for the aggregate traffic, but also freeing up a path for anything accessing the Diggle route from Carrington.
Thank you. And a sort of couple of questions linked to that. Carrington was, this is from Julian Worth, Carrington was turned down previously as an SRFI location. Is there confidence things will be different this time?
Well, I think that's up to how many people want to join the cause, and as I said earlier, the Trafford local plan is currently out to consultation until about the middle of next month. Rail Future are going to be making representations. We've also sold the idea to the Friends of Carrington Moss, who have got some fairly strong views about what happens at Carrington. I think the fact that we've been able to demonstrate that we've got access available from both north and south might change people's view about it. There's certainly a plan to expand the amount of employment land at Carrington above and beyond what was previously envisaged perhaps some years ago when it was rejected before. And I would argue that employment land that is rail served is likely to accrue a far greater value, and you're much more likely to attract inward investment and therefore justify your planning allocation on that site if you were to invite rail to serve it as well.
And Peter, do you have any thoughts on that and sort of the planning framework at all?
Yeah, certainly what Philip said about fitting in with the Trafford local plan. That's certainly something that we can support. Philip, if you want to speak to us about that. In terms of TFGM, we're very much tied to the local councils in terms of land use planning. So we've certainly, if you've followed the news and the spatial framework, we've had political difficulties in getting all signed off and everyone joined together. But certainly, yeah, Philip, if you want to make contact with us, that'd be helpful.
I'm happy to do that, and I'm even happy to volunteer my services should you ever need a speaker from Andy Burnham's political side of the fence to bring him up to speed with this. Happy to do that.
Cool. Right. Before we get on to more political things, I don't know if it's political or not. Question for Ed. Any thoughts on moving residual waste to the D-side plant, which I think is actually operated by Wheelabrator? Yeah,
we've had contact from the operator there that has asked for some top-up volume. However, our understanding is that from the local deliveries from the local councils, there is not much headroom. I think they asked me for 100 tonnes a day, so obviously it wouldn't be viable to send a train. And all their other deliveries, like I say, come from the local councils collecting on the rounds. So I don't think that possibility is there, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's very much a question of volume, isn't it, once you're looking at the rail solutions, yeah. Okay. In Manchester as a whole, this is from Simon Ives, any thoughts whether the possible or probable decline in commuter traffic post-COVID will impact on free-up capacity, indeed, that could be used for freight? Peter, any thoughts or any expectations on passenger demand?
Certainly work on sort of passenger demand post-COVID is in very early stages, and DfT is certainly battling with various demand forecast models at the moment. What we do see from the Manchester Recovery Task Force is a reduction in services coming in May next year, and that is really to bring reliability back into the network. But obviously, with that, there is opportunities as well for freight. And one of the things that Transport for Greater Manchester, in discussions with industry colleagues on that Manchester Recovery Task Force, was to ensure that the freight services are maintained at current levels. So it's a bit of a sitting on the fence slightly, watch this space, but it's certainly something that we're considering. And in this time where we're not sure what's going to happen with commuting demand, it's certainly something that we need to look into.
So I know the Rail Delivery Group are working hard on some value of freight work, which we hope will land fairly soon and ought to help to illuminate some of these questions around the value of a freight path and the value of a passenger path, and hopefully that'll help bring some extra dimensions to the thinking as well, because we all need passenger demand to come back, but we also need to try and find ways of running freight that bit better, don't we? Okay, we've got a couple of questions left. Port Salford is named in the Liverpool City region bid for Freeport status. Can any of the speakers expand a bit more on the role of this site? And also Parkside SRFI, how they would fit into the wider plan for rail freight in the Northwest. Any thoughts on, without obviously not asking anyone to comment on Freeport bidding, because we're all wise enough not to do that, but any thoughts on sort of the role of Parkside and Port Salford in the mix?
We've had a look at certainly Port Salford, and again, it's one of these things where I think one of the other questioners pointed out that there's growing congestion on the Chat Moss line. Having looked at it on the map, I'm not sure whether it's capable of taking the 700 metre container trains. I'm not really quite sure what's proposed at Port Salford, because it's being flagged as a sort of tri-mode thing of road, rail and sea, but there's no way you'll get a 200,000 ton vessel up the Manchester Ship Canal. So and it all seems to be the wrong side of Manchester. You've got to either go via the gradients at Miles Platting or turn left at Earlstown, where there's a very short and I would think non-compliant radius curve to get to the West Coast main line at a fairly congested point on it. So that's just looking at it from the intermodal viewpoint. Others may have a different view.
Peter, is it something your studies looked at at all?
It's not looked at it in any detail, and it's something we're sort of looking to develop in the future. In terms of next steps of where we go with our freight work, that's certainly something that we're interested in.
Thank you. And as a comment points out, Chat Moss is an important corridor, but a congested one as well. So noted. And then just one final comment, and something I'd picked up as well, really. And all three speakers spoke about decarbonisation, and we know we're playing two sides on that. One is, as you pointed out, Peter, modal shift, and the other is the need to get on and decarbonise ourselves. And I think we've all been pleased to see Rail Operations Group placing the first motor for tri-mode locomotives, and I'm sure there'll be more orders for bi-modes to come. So I think that the industry is looking to commit on that. The challenge is making sure we've got enough overhead wires to run under. As I keep saying to Network Rail, when people buy bi-modes, they're going to want to put the pantograph up, and you're going to need to have some wires and some power for them to do so. Phil, a specific question for you around the sort of not having reception sidings point, and how do you envisage that working if we've got more use of electric traction for the main haul?
Yeah, I mean, I looked at this question. It came in from, is it David Baker?
Yeah.
And I think that, this whole business about what do you do for the last mile, if you've got, as I think you've alluded to, if you've got, if we're going to decarbonise, we're going to electrify more of the network. Our benefit cost ratio includes the cost of electrification. And quite clearly, you're going to have, by the time this happens, much more of a rollout of fleets of locomotives like the Class 93s that you mentioned. Whether they can depan on the fly and switch to battery or whatever it is for the last mile to get under the gantries. Whatever solution is found is also going to have to be found at the Felixstowe length end of the corridor, because we've got a problem there as well. But Felixstowe don't seem to be too frightened of that.
I mean, my view is, without wishing to prolong matters, where you've got an operation the scale of Trafford Park or or Felixstowe, you start to justify the cost of an electric shunt loco, many of which are already being built. It's perhaps the smaller locations where that additional cost, some of the aggregates terminals simply doesn't really work, that we need to look at those solutions. But there's a lot of research happening in this space, but I think, Peter's right to reflect on the need for investment in electrification as a core part of that. Lovely. So I think we've answered the questions that came in. A comment from Peter, for Peter just coming on the chat there, which I'll let you pick that up. But for now, I think we're right on time. A really, really interesting session. It's always fascinating, I think, to hear about real traffic that's operating and to actually understand what it means for the business and for those communities when we see something like the waste trains in operation, to understand some potential options for long-term planning. And I think, from Peter's point of view, the call for arms around a more collaborative relationship to really try and help drive those ambitions for modal shift in and around the Northwest. So thank you, a huge thanks to all three of you for taking the time to speak to us today, for preparing your presentations and for answering questions. We will send presentations out to those people who want them. Just drop us a note. And I'm sure Ed, Phil, Peter, you'll be happy for us to share your contact details if people have got questions that they want to come back to you on an individual basis as well. So thank you all very much. Thank you to those of you who joined us today. We'll let you get back to your afternoon Teams and Zooms meetings. Our next event is our Scottish Conference, which is booking now on our website. We've got the Scottish Transport Minister speaking at that. That's on the 24th of March. Details on the website as usual. And we'll have some more webinars. We're just working up the programme for some further ones beyond that as we get to the Easter. And at some point, she says, hopefully, we might actually see some of you in real life. But for the meantime, thank you all so much today. Speakers, thank you so much. That was brilliant. Take care now.